Welcome to Cavan TV News and Views. We would like to thank Saro for the use of the broadband and to Positive Age for the use of the studio here in Drummondley, Cavan. Well, my next guest is somebody who's had a lifelong interest and involvement in GAA on a local and on his county level, and retired principal with lots of time on his hands now, and he's written some books. The first one, Up the Reds, and if you're very good you can guess what club that is, and second book is Breffni Boo, and the latest book is the Gallant John Joe. And here this evening we have none other than George Cartwright. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Anya. How are you?
George, as we say, a great week for Cavan.
Absolutely.
Aren't we delighted since last Sunday?
Oh, it's been fantastic, Anya, and it was unexpected by most people. They thought that Cavan did well to get to an Ulster final, but everybody thought, or most people thought, that Donegal were a very strong team. But obviously the players and management and didn't have any fears and got it right on the day and overturned the hot favourites and achieved something absolutely fantastic for Cavan.
Yeah, and there's a very interesting little fact or note going around out there about the four teams that are in the finals, and it has a correlation with 1920. Isn't that just absolutely amazing?
It's amazing. It's fate, some say. Others say it's in the stars. It would have been almost impossible to predict, but yes, Tipperary came out of Munster, Cavan came out of Ulster, Mayo and Dublin, Connacht and Leinster respectively. The same four teams that came out of the provincials in 1920, 100 years later. And Tipperary went on to win the All-Ireland in 1920. So we'll wait and see what will happen in the All-Ireland.
We'll wait and see. You could not write a script like that.
No, you couldn't, because the odds, I suppose, on Tipperary after 85 years and Cavan after 23 winning, the odds would have been high earlier on in the season. Well,
all we can do in Cavan, and we're on a high since last week, is just hope for the best. And as you see from that, something came from somewhere, and maybe we could win in All-Ireland.
Absolutely. Dublin have to be beaten at some stage. And who knows, what better time than next Saturday week when Cavan take them on. Yeah.
Well, George, I say congratulations. You have written your third book, and it's the fantastic book here I have, The Gallant John Joe Cavan's Millennium Man. And that, of course, is in Eason's just launched this week, and just out this week. And there's a bit of serendipity there as well. This is the 68th anniversary of the Gallant John Joe's death.
Yeah,
actually,
on Sunday last, the 22nd of November, the same day as the Ulster final. John Joe was 68 years dead on Sunday last, the 22nd. So maybe, as people think, maybe he was looking down and gave his blessing to Cavan. Maybe to his biography as well, being published a few days beforehand.
Well, we sing about the Gallant John Joe, and but why did you write a book about him?
Well, I suppose, Anya, I grew up in Cornafane, and I heard stories about John Joe from I was knee high, from my late parents. I heard some of my neighbours talk about him. I went to Corliss National School, which is a small two-teacher school, about 2 miles down the road from where I live, and John Joe went to that school. So we heard stories about him and his brother Big Tom playing football, and they were great footballers and they won All-Irelands and so on and so forth. And I suppose I was a curious young man, and I asked my dad lots of questions about him, and I came to a stage then in later years that I thought very few people actually know much about him. We know he was around and he captained Cavan and won the All-Ireland and was captain in the polo grounds and so on and so forth. But the young generation, very little, and even at my own generation, there was nothing much more. I never
knew he was a soldier.
He
served in the army.
An officer in the army, yes. He spent 15 years of his life in Kildare, and those 15 years, there would be very little known about those years in Kildare. He left Cavan when he was 19, and until his tragic death in 1934, his life, his time was spent in Kildare. But there was a whole gap there that nobody in Cavan knew anything about. So I always thought that was worth exploring, obviously, as part of his story, and that his story was worth writing down for posterity and for the next generation, because a lot of the people who lived, played with him and knew him Many of them now obviously have gone to their own eternal reward. So there wasn't that many around anymore that remembered him or knew him. So it was important to capture their thoughts and their memories of him and put it in print.
Would you say that in the book you got to the essence of what kind of a man he was?
Well, I certainly tried to, Anya. Yes, I tried to. Now, I suppose only the readership will make that decision. But yes, I would have. Obviously, his football career is one thing, and that's well recorded, and it's in the book too. But you don't want a list of games and matches played and all the rest, because a reader wouldn't find it. You get bored quick enough. So it was important to describe the kind of man he was, his other achievements in life, his family and his family man, and all those things that made the man. And yes, I suppose a couple of things stand out. His leadership ability. He was a leader. He was a leader of men. He was captain of most teams he played on. He was captain of all teams that won championships. He was a leader in the army. And his army training, of course, helped him in that regard. And the other great thing about him, he was a gentleman, very likeable man off the field for those that knew him and those that remember him, a kind, loving person. And those aspects of the person were important in developing his story, I thought.
Okay, so to get that amount of information on a man after so many years, and to make it as accurate as possible, your research must have been phenomenal. How did you go about that, or how did you do that?
Yeah, well, I suppose from newspapers at the time, obviously the daily papers, the Anglo-Celts, Kildare newspapers, you get the story, you get the dates, and you get the matches, and you get the facts. Now, that itself isn't enough. It was important to talk to people that knew him, and especially people that played with him or against him. And I was very lucky to be able to interview a lot of people in Cavan, a lot of people in Kildare, and in other counties as well, that for different reasons had something to do with him. Some maybe in the army, and gave a great insight to me about John Joe's time in the army. I think of one man in particular, Father Michael McGrail from Mayo, who could tell me a lot about his army career. Then obviously his colleagues that played football with him, Paddy Carlin, Johnny Cusick, the late Johnny Cusick, men like that here in Cavan that played alongside him in Grove Park. Mickey Walsh is another man that I interviewed. And then in Kildare, I was lucky to meet and interview a number of people in Kildare. Now, since I started doing research, a number of those people are gone to their eternal reward. They've passed on, or Jake or Rashid, and I'd like to just remember them as well. Then, of course, talking to some members of his family, nephews and nieces, grandnephews and nieces, and above all else, of course, his daughter. He has two daughters, one in Dublin and one in England, and his two sons have died inside the last few years. But I was able to get good insight to John Joe as a father, John Joe as a husband, so on and so forth. And obviously that was part of his story as well.
How long did it take to research that?
Oh, a good while, Anya. It's not something that you just set out to say, I'm going to start this and do it. I have a beginning date or an end date. As I said, I had an interest in his career from a young age, and I suppose I was always looking out for maybe articles about him, some stories about him, photographs, so on and so forth. And they would have gathered over the years. Now, I suppose since I retired from the day job, I have had a bit more time, and I would have, in the last year or two, obviously would spend a good bit of time putting it together. And I suppose the lockdown helped in one sense, because it was due originally to be launched last May, but the lockdown put paid to that, and I was able to touch it up maybe more so over the summer and get it maybe to a better level than maybe it would have been. So to be happy with the end product.
Looking over your book, and there the book is again, folks, The Gallant John Joe, Cavan's Millennium Man. and it's in Easton's at the moment, but we'll talk about the distribution of it later. You've got some fantastic pictures in it again going back over the ages, over time, research to get these pictures, and meticulous work to get that on. Well done. You have one very interesting picture. I think we're going to have a look at it now on screen, and that is of John Joe, the man himself, when he got married.
Oh, yeah.
If we can get that up on screen, yeah.
Very nice. He got married on Tuesday, funny enough, that's the day, and he was preparing to play the All-Ireland semi-final against Roscommon, and yes, he got married, and his army colleagues, as you see, Olive Rooney, John Joe, and Olive Rooney was his wife, and his friends, as you can see, they put the swords in a guard of honour over the bride and groom as they left John the Baptist Church in Blackrock, September the 7th, 1943. So it's a nice photograph. 9 years later, exactly to the month. Well, no, to November 1952. He died, and he left a widow, Olive, and 4 small
Yeah, we're
children.
going to say that he was 34 years of age when he died,
34 years
and
of age
he died rather tragically. He died from possibly a football injury.
Well, he died quite suddenly,
and
yes.
that would be, in this modern days, that would be a tragedy. And he left a young family behind him as well. But in that short life, he left a legacy behind him as well.
He packed a lot into that short life. Like his GA career is one thing, and to Captain Cavan in the Polo Grounds was unique. The only All-Ireland final ever played outside Ireland. But excuse me, his role in the army was significant. He rose up through the ranks from he went in as a cadet, and after 2 years he was commissioned. Then he became captain a couple of years later, and then later on he was assigned to the role of commandant. So he had a big role. He rose to...
Very young to be a commandant, very young. Indeed, that's very young to get to such a high rank.
And he was in the army at a very difficult time in our country's history. This was during the backdrop of World War II, which was on at the time, and the Curragh, he had a huge responsibility there, training young men and preparing for a possible attack and so on and so forth. It was a very responsible time, and he was very highly regarded and thought of as a leader of men in the Curragh, off the football field obviously, but in the Curragh, in his role in the army. He played a significant part in the training and preparation of the men there during, as I said, a time in our country's history where people were afraid of a possible invasion by Germany in particular, and he certainly had a very responsible job at the time, and by all accounts he discharged all those responsibilities with style and with skill and integrity and professionalism.
Yeah, and all that, you have all that in the book. Let's talk about the book itself and the presentation of the book. What about the cover of the book? You're very proud of the cover of the book.
Yeah, the cover has turned out very well. I want to pay tribute to my publishers, Ballpint
There we are, we're
Press.
talking about it again.
Ballpint Press from P.J. Cunningham, and is the owner of the company, Ballpint Press. He's published quite a few books. And Joe Kyle, his designer, I think they made a very good job of it. The cover, the Gallant John Joe. The Gallant John Joe, there's two parts in the name. The Gallant John Joe comes from the song, obviously, the Gallant John Joe, which was made famous by Peter Albert McGovern, a man from Swanlinbar in County Cavan, who wrote it many years ago. And of course, it has been sang a lot of times since. Ian Corrigan and Declan Nairney and different people. And the Millennium Man is a reference to John Joe being chosen on the team of the Millennium, which was way back in 1999, November 1999, the best football 15 over the previous millennium was the tag, and John Joe was on that team, the only Cavan man on it. So I thought the blend, the Gallant John Joe, Cavan's Millennium Man, seemed a nice ring to it.
Yeah.
And the other, on the back of the the book, there's two tributes. One from the late great Mick Higgins, who spoke many years ago very eloquently about John Joe, and the other is from a man that's still good, hale and hearty, that knew him, Jim MacDonald. Jim would be much younger, but he remembers him when Jim was a student in St. Pat's, and Jim went on himself to be a footballer of great note too.
Well, I can tell you from my own experience, George, that I've heard great reviews about your book in such a short time of it being released. I was talking to one guy at work today, and he said he read the first 70 pages before he could put it down. So great stuff for the book. So at the moment, it's launched Cavan-wise in selected shops Cavan-wise. Tell us now. You've had, go back to your launch. Obviously, you can't have a big book launch like everybody would like to have. So, did you do a virtual launch? Did you do an online launch?
Well, there was obviously, as you said, with COVID, etc., a launch was out of the question. So we had to improvise with other. We had Brian Carty from RTE. Brian did a virtual launch.
Yeah, I saw some of that. That was very good. Yeah.
He spoke and launched it virtually. Other than that, it was just in the shops, and that's it. It's in Easton's and it's in local shops. It's in a couple of shops in Ballinagh, Killashandra, Arva, Cornafane, most towns around. Most villages around, well-known shops would have it, and it's in Kildare as well. And obviously, the plan was to extend it to other areas, but there was such a demand for it in Cavan, and those shops we just had enough to cover Cavan at this stage. But there are more coming, and hopefully before Christmas they'll be in shops.
And of course, Christmas is a great time to launch a book, and it coincides with the football as well, with the anniversary. And Christmas is a great time to launch a book. To give a gift of a book, to get a gift of a book is absolutely brilliant. Great work in your book, and really, the hard work, that research and the hard work that has gone into this book is amazing.
There's a lot of work into it, but I suppose if you weren't comfortable or happy doing it, you wouldn't bother with it. Nobody asked me to do it, nobody put me under any pressure, and nobody offered me or asked me any deadlines or gave me any deadlines. So it was, I suppose, a labour of love on you, or maybe a pet project or whatever. It was something I tied around with, and got it this far anyway. Yeah, well, so that's it, folks. If you want to get the essence of the John Joe, the essence of the man that he was, you heard George's work on how he got it to this level. Great book, good time of the year to launch a book for Christmas, and I'd like to say thanks from everybody in Cavan for all the hard work you've put into the GAA on every level over the years. Well done, and of course for your previous books, Up the Reds and Breffni Abu. Thanks once again, George, for sharing your knowledge and for imparting the knowledge, and again for the hard work you've done and sharing the knowledge and giving us the beauty and an idea of the man that was John Joe. Thank you very much, Anya. Thank you.